People are going missing all over North America under baffling conditions. In some cases, there are people where someone's looking right at them, they turn around, and then, moments later, they're gone. Or in some cases, people will go missing and then are found again in locations that are impossible to get to. And so one man named David Paulides, who's a former police detective, began investigating these very strange disappearances because nobody else was. And he started compiling what he was finding in an absolutely fascinating book series called Missing 411. And so as I read through all of his books, I've begun pulling some of the more interesting cases that he details and highlighting them on this channel. Today, I'm going to focus on 4 instances of kids going missing after being in locked vehicles. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. If that's of interest to you, please throw the like button into the bottomless pit near Ellensburg, Washington, and also subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. On October 16th, 1930, John Sullivan, who was with his nephew, Lawrence Sullivan, who was only 3 years old, they were driving together in the middle of the Nevada desert. They were about 150 miles away from Reno in this very remote area. John was a gold prospector, and he was heading to an area that he wanted to scout out and see if it was a proper place to prospect for gold. This area, the roads didn't even go to it. You had to drive down this road where it just kind of dead ends in the middle of the desert, right near this huge steep mountain range, at which point you needed to park your car, get out, and then walk over this hill right in front of where the road ends, and it was going to be over that hill looking down into this valley where John wanted to prospect. So he drives down the road, he parks the car, and he turns to Lawrence and he says, "Hey, I'm going to go over this hill for a minute and check the area out. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Stay in here, don't leave the car, I'll be right back." John gets out, he locks the car, he walks up to the top of the hill, and he turns around, looks at Lawrence, and waves at him. Lawrence looks up at his uncle and he waves back, and he's smiling. So clear interaction. Lawrence knows where John is and where John's going. John can clearly see Lawrence. There's no one in the area too. I'm talking, this is remote as remote can be. You're just right up against this mountain. That's the only thing going on in this area. So John turns his back on Lawrence. He goes over the hill. He's now out of sight of the vehicle, and he does a short inspection of this area that he wanted to prospect. He goes back up over the hill, and he sees immediately that the door is now open and Lawrence is not in the vehicle anymore. John is not immediately concerned because it's only been a couple of minutes. He can't have gone very far, and there's nowhere to even go. There's no trees. I mean, basically it's just this mountain right here. But beyond the mountain, there's really nowhere to go. So he goes down, he looks in the car, he looks under the car, he's yelling for Lawrence, no response. And sound carried really well in this area. After a little while, and he can't hear anything, he hasn't seen Lawrence, he's starting to get very desperate because they are in the middle of nowhere and the temperatures are going to drop well below freezing at night. So John has to make this totally painful decision to get in his car and drive and get help. And so he leaves Lawrence because he can't find him. He gets help. The sheriff comes out there and they start this massive search for this child. This whole time, John is convinced someone had to abduct him because Lawrence knew where John was. If he was to get out of the vehicle, let's say, he would have walked over the hill to where John was. John was just on the other side of the hill. It doesn't make any sense that Lawrence would get out and wander in a different direction. He would have gone to John. They were very close. He might have wanted to see what he was doing on the other side of the hill. In the first few days of the search, they can't find any tracks of the child or another person that could have potentially abducted him, or even tracks of an animal that could have potentially taken Lawrence away. There's just nothing. They did find his hat, but that was it. There's no other evidence to go off of. And so after 4 days of searching, the newspapers began running headlines about potentially an eagle swooping down and taking Lawrence away, because that's all anyone could speculate given the fact that there was no tracks anywhere and that his hat had fallen out. At this point, the police feel totally helpless. They don't understand how this child has managed to evade capture. They're not ready to accept that an eagle has taken him away. And so the police bring in a Native American tracker who was known in the area as an exceptional tracker. So this tracker comes in and manages to pick up a partial trail of this child. And he starts following it, and they get 7 miles away from where this boy went missing. And the tracker begins going up the side of this cliff. They have to actually bring in climbing equipment to get up this cliff. They go 1,400 feet up this cliff. So over 400 meters, they're going up this sheer cliff with climbing equipment. And they get all the way up there, and there's this one little shelf, this one little rocky shelf that this tracker has brought them to. And sure enough, on this shelf is Lawrence, and he's more or less unharmed. He's sleeping, but he's on this little shelf. He's tucked up against this tree. But interestingly, the tree had this bough that was fairly elastic, and it had clearly been placed over his neck, basically trapping him tight up against the mountain. It was like he had fallen into a trap, because the police said that had he moved suddenly, he would have broken his neck the way he was positioned. So the police carefully undo the branch, and they bring the boy down, which was a total task considering how far up they were. And he's unharmed. He's a couple scratches on his face, but that's about it. They have no idea how he, one, got 7 miles away and then over 400 meters up a sheer cliff, so 1,400 feet up a sheer cliff that adults needed climbing equipment to get to. And then how did you survive the below freezing temperatures? You were out here for nearly a week. Nobody knows. On October 19th, 1973, James and Carol Duffy decide they want to go camping. So they have this big RV camper, and they load up their two kids, Jimmy, who was 2, and Natalie, who was a little over 1 year old. They load them in the RV along with their 2 cats, and they take off for Lake Wenatchee, which is in the state of Washington. It's this beautiful campsite where lots of people with RVs would park right up against this lake. So they make it to Lake Wenatchee, they park their RV, they all get out, they're going on a little walk, but the kids seem fussy, and so Carol and James decide to put them down for a nap. Carol takes the kids inside the RV, she puts them down for a nap. They're in there with the 2 cats. She shuts and locks the RV and goes outside. At this point, James says he wants to go scout for a good hunting spot around where they were camping. And so James takes off, and he's looking for a place to go hunting. And Carol decides she's going to walk a little ways around the lake, but keeping an eye on the RV the whole time. And also James was within eyesight of the camper as well. And after about 15 minutes, James goes back to the camper and checks on the kids. Carol would say she saw James doing that and kind of looked over to get the thumbs up from James to make sure the kids are okay. James goes in, the kids are sleeping, the cats are sleeping. James comes out of the camper, he shuts and locks it. He turns and he sees Carol. She's about 100 meters away, so a little over 300 feet away. He gives her a thumbs up and then actually walks over to her. So he's gonna go walk around with his wife now. So he makes it over to Carol, and they're walking a little bit farther away, so they're still only about 150 meters away from their camper when they hear a scream coming from their camper. When they both turned around, there was a big tree kind of obscuring their view to the camper, so they kind of ran back on the path to get a better look at their camper, and all they can see is the door to the camper is now open. So the 2 of them sprint over to the camper. James gets there first, he goes inside, and his son, Jimmy, is gone. Their youngest child, Natalie, was still sleeping, and their 2 cats were still sleeping. Remember, Carol and James were on the other side of this lake about 100 meters away when they heard this screech coming from the RV. It seems odd that the cats and Natalie wouldn't wake up to that, but they didn't. After an initial frantic search of the area where they can't find Jimmy or any sign of Jimmy, they call the police, they show up, and they begin doing a search themselves. And after 2 hours of aggressively combing this whole campsite and talking to all the other people that were there wasn't that many people there, so they were able to interview everyone, and everyone had an alibi, no one was near their camper. The police start to feel really suspicious about Carol and James. And in fact, they straight up accuse James of hurting his child and trying to cover it up. But James and Carol swear they were on the other side of the lake there, they heard that scream, they ran over, this is what we found. And so for 4 days, there's this massive search with canines, helicopters, you name it. They are combing the area, they're interviewing everyone they can. There is nothing, no sign of this child. And so the suspicion that Carol or James had something to do with the disappearance of this child only grew. And so eventually both parents were subjected to a polygraph test, and both stuck to their story, and both passed. They had nothing to do with the disappearance of their child. They were telling the truth. The police still felt like there's something off here about these parents. They must have had something to do with this. And so they really dug into their backgrounds and the family backgrounds, talking to friends and family. And every single person in this family's circle and even outer circle said, no, they care about their kids. They would never harm Jimmy. But through their digging, one thing that did come up is that Jimmy was actually considered a very frail child that basically couldn't do anything without assistance. So between the polygraph test that rules out the parents as being potentially responsible, and now this information that Jimmy was this very frail child who's also 2, right? He didn't get up, open the camper, escape, and then evade this massive search effort. That didn't happen either. So all you're left with is abduction. But the police, they basically cordoned off this whole site and were able to account for every single person that was in the park at any time while the Duffys were there. And every single person had an alibi and completely checked out. Eventually, the search for Jimmy was terminated, and to this day, almost 50 years later, we still have no idea what happened to Jimmy, where he went, and how he got there. Late at night on March 26, 1962, the Crawford family, who lived in Tennessee, noticed their 1-year-old was sick, so they wanted to take her to the doctor's office. Mr. and Mrs. Crawford hop in the car with their 1-year-old, and they bring along their 3-year-old named Faye. They drive to the doctor's office. Turns out the 1-year-old's going to be just fine. They give the kid some medication. They head back to their house, and when they pull into the driveway, Mr. and Mrs. Crawford turn around. The 1-year-old is awake, but the 3-year-old, Faye, is fast asleep. So the parents look at each other and they say, okay, we'll get the baby inside. We'll give Faye a couple more minutes to sleep inside the car, and then we'll come out and we'll get her. So Mr. and Mrs. Crawford carefully get the 1-year-old out without waking Faye up. They shut the door, they lock it, the windows are up. They go into the house, they put their 1-year-old down, and literally maybe a couple of minutes goes by. They come out and the doors are still shut, but Faye is gone. Now, because the vehicle was still shut, they're thinking, oh, she must have gotten out of her seat and maybe is tucked under the seats. So they run over and they look inside, and Faye's nowhere to be found. She's not in the vehicle. So the vehicle itself had only 2 doors. There was 2 rows of seating, but only 2 doors. If you were in the back seat, like Faye was, you would need to push down, fold down one of the 2 front seats and then open that door to get out. But both door handles on the inside were broken off. They did not work. You would have to manually roll down a window and then reach outside the car and use the outside door handle to open either door. So the parents are looking at the vehicle and the doors are shut, the windows are up, everything is still locked. And while it is possible that Faye could have, in theory, got out of her car seat, folded down one of the 2 front seats, rolled down a window, reached out, opened the door, got outside, rolled the window back up, pushed the lockdown manually, and then shut the door again. That is possible. It's extremely unlikely. And she had never done that. She'd never even gotten her own seat undone, let alone that complicated maneuver of getting out and reshutting the door and locking it. So obviously the police are called, they show up, they're searching the area, they can't find this child, and then it starts to snow and the temperatures start to drop. So the police and volunteers stay out all night. There is no sign of this child, and the Crawfords are bracing for the worst. The next day around 11 a.m., 3 miles away from where Faye went missing, she walks onto the property of someone's house. She was barefoot, but she was more or less okay. Obviously, the parents are elated. They're so happy their daughter's okay. Now, normally, when somebody goes missing, the investigation stays open until they're discovered. If they're discovered alive, even if the circumstances are really weird, because they're alive, it more or less ends the investigation, because what are you looking for at this point? They're found, they're alive, everything's okay. It's rare that an investigation would continue after they've been found. And in this case, the police left the investigation open because they couldn't understand how Faye could have gotten out of that vehicle, considering how difficult that would have been. And how did she get 3 miles away in less than 12 hours in the middle of the night walking through a forest? Not to mention, historically, kids are creatures of habit. If they're missing and they're in the middle of the woods, but it's nighttime, they don't just keep walking. They lay down and they go to sleep. And then when the sun comes up, they get up and then they keep moving. So for her to have gone 3 air miles from where she went missing to this farmstead, that means she did not lay down and go to sleep. She kept walking all through the night, so none of it added up. And then when they asked Faye what happened, she would just smile and laugh. That's all they could ever get out of this child. So despite leaving the investigation open, No one ever came to any sort of conclusion about how she got out of that car and how she covered that distance or why. It's just a big mystery, like all of these missing 411 cases. In 2001, Paul Wayment was 37 years old. He was a construction worker living in Salt Lake City, and he was about to get divorced for the second time. In his first marriage, after the divorce, he got sole custody of their 4 children. He was a great father. The judge saw it that way and said the kids were better off with him. And following this second divorce, he would file for sole custody of the child that they had had together, who was a little boy, 2 years old, named Gage, and he would win. So Paul is a single father of 5 children. Gage was a lot younger than the other 4 kids, and so he kind of became Paul's little buddy and went everywhere with Paul. They were very, very close. On October 25th, 2001, Paul takes Gage, puts him in the back of his truck, he buckles him into his car seat, and the two of them head off to this area where Paul would hunt for deer. It was actually a private deer hunting area that was totally enclosed by a fence. Now, in order to access this private area, you needed to be a member, and Paul was a member, and once you become a member, they give you a gate code. And so Paul and Gage drive up, he gets to the gate, he punches in the code, he opens up the gate, the two of them drive in. He said he shuts the gate and locks it, and the two of them head up this path to this area where he planned to look for some deer. When he parked the car, he saw that Gage was passed out in his car seat and just did not look like he was going to be psyched to get out and go look for deer. Paul thinks about it for a minute and he decides, you know what, I'm going to leave Gage in the back seat. I'll just shut and lock the car. He's warm, he's taken care of. I'm going to go spend just a couple of minutes looking for deer, and then I'll come back and I'll get him. So he hops out, he locks the car, and he walks a little ways away from the truck where it's still right behind him, but a couple of other hunters that were on this area, they saw Paul, they flagged him down, and they started talking. He gets preoccupied, and after 30 minutes or so, he realizes he needs to go back and check on his son. And when he goes back up, the front door on Gage's side is open and Gage is gone. Paul runs up to the vehicle. He can't believe that Gage is gone. Paul screams for the other hunters to come over and help him. He's like, I can't find my son. They start looking in the area, and apparently Paul was so grief-stricken, he began vomiting. He was totally hysterical, and he kept saying, it's my fault. It's my fault. I left him here. Police show up, and this massive search is launched. But you got to remember that this is a gated-in area. Everything is locked. You need to have a code to get in here. And the only people that apparently were on this site at the time were the other hunters that Paul was talking to. And so obviously that casts a huge spotlight on those hunters and Paul being responsible for whatever's happened to Gage. But initially they just focus on looking for this child. And after a little bit of searching, and there's absolutely no sign of this kid, they do turn on Paul. He's like, you know what? If anything happened to my son, it's my fault. I left him in the vehicle. It's my fault. Like, he's not being defensive at all. He is 100% saying, it's my fault. I did this. He's not saying I harmed my child, but he's taking full responsibility for whatever's happened. And the police pick up on that, and they're like, you know what? I think he's telling the truth. And he's also saying that he was with those other hunters, and they're the only other ones here. So for 4 days, this massive search is launched all over this hunting area, even beyond the hunting area, and there's no sign of this child. He's just gone. And so they terminate the search, but Paul's church offered to send another 150 volunteers to continue the search. And one of those volunteers was a man by the name of James Wilkes. He was an avid outdoorsman, and he brought along his dog, Dino. And over the course of this search, James and his dog actually get lost, which David Paulides says is very rare. There's so many people doing the search at one time, it would be hard to get lost, but it does happen. And so James and his dog wind up miles away from where they were supposed to be searching. They don't know where they are, they're lost. And so that night, the temperatures are dropping, it's snowing, and James and his dog ended up getting under a tree, in this little pocket under a tree, and they huddled together all night. And James said it was one of the worst nights of his life. He didn't sleep much, but at some point in the morning when the sun started to come up, he was happy to be alive. You know, he didn't die of hypothermia. And he and Dino start walking. And they've only walked a couple of minutes when the dog stops and he starts licking something on the ground. And he looks down, and under a couple inches of snow, it's the body of Gage. James scoops up the body, and for hours they start walking back kind of generally towards where he thinks he needs to go. He ends up finding a fence that he recognized, and since he was exhausted from carrying the boy, he placed the boy's body near a fence post that he knew he'd be able to recognize, and he and Dino made their way up to the search and rescue headquarters, told them where to find the boy's body, and they went back and they collected the boy's body. Now, because James is the one to find the boy, they immediately had to treat him like a suspect. They polygraphed him because You found the boy, no one else has found him, you're ways away from the search, but he passed his polygraph. James would say to police that when he found the body, there were all these tracks around the body. They looked like canine tracks, but they weren't Dino's, and he knows they weren't Dino's because he was holding onto Dino all night, and he hadn't been in this particular area the night before. So investigators are like, if there were other canine tracks all over that area, it means, one, we searched it, but if we searched it, why didn't they pick up on the boy, who they're trained to smell? Or what animal was this? Did it have anything to do with why Gage is here in the first place? After the autopsy, it was determined that Gage died from hypothermia. His father was absolutely devastated. He spent all this time at the site where his body was found. He created a shrine for his son. He was known to spend hours in his vehicle trying to figure out how his son got out of his seat and then made his way out that front door, something he had never seen his son do. He was just totally devastated, and he was ultimately charged with negligent homicide, and he pled guilty to it and was given 30 days in jail, but before his sentence was carried out, he took his own life. So like all cases that David Paulides covers in the Missing 411 series, we're left with a lot of questions, and unfortunately they may never get answered. But that doesn't stop us from speculating, so please go in the comments and give me your best theory as to what's going on. How are these kids getting outside of these vehicles and winding up in places that seem impossible to get to? Not only will I respond to all the early commenters, the best theory will get pinned at the top of the comment section. If you enjoyed today's video and you want to see more like it, please throw the like button into the bottomless pit near Ellensburg, Washington, and also please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username on both platforms is the same, JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion for this channel, please submit it on our subreddit, just called MrBallen. It's linked below. I read it every day, so if I intentionally use your story suggestion, I will absolutely credit you. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, I'm just incredibly thankful for your support, and until next time, guys, that's gonna do it. See ya. I remember one of my buddies told me that I had to watch this one particular episode of the show Paranormal Witness. It's a show on Sci-Fi Network. They take people who have first-hand encounters with something paranormal and they make it into a TV show. And I was directed to watch one episode in their first season called The Poltergeist. And when I tuned in to watch it, I was ready to turn it off. It just sounded like every other haunting that's ever happened. Family moves into house. They think it's great. Suddenly they hear banging on the walls, and all of a sudden demons are attacking them. This story starts the same way. However, they took a whole bunch of pictures, and they have a whole bunch of videos, and even if all of it is a hoax, it's terrifying. I remember watching it and having to pause it. I was shook up. I didn't want to finish the episode. I thought I would pay homage to, in my opinion, one of, if not the single scariest episode of Paranormal Witness or any paranormal show I've ever seen, and I would retell that story on my channel. And so that's what I'm going to do today. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, I would encourage you to sneak into the bathroom the next time the like button is taking a shower and steal their towel and their clothes and then run away. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In 2006, Susan Lewis and her daughter Jamie moved into a new home in Southern California. It was this nice little house that they referred to as their sanctuary. They loved it there. And shortly after moving in, Susan's new boyfriend, Matt, he moved in as well. Matt and Jamie got along great. Also, Matt had a daughter named Marie, who was the same age as Jamie. And so those two got along great. Susan and Matt are getting along great. One happy family living in this beautiful little home that they call their sanctuary. I mean, it's a charmed life. Everything would change when the peanut butter spilled. A few weeks after moving in, it's this beautiful summer day, and Matt and Jamie and Marie are all outside goofing around in the pool, and Susan steps away from them to go into the house to make lunch for the group. Susan goes into the kitchen, and she sees on the counter that a peanut butter jar had its lid off and had been turned on its side. And oddly enough, the peanut butter seemed to be running out of the jar like it had been melted. It was like in a liquid state, pouring out of the jar and had gone all over the ground. She felt the temperature in the air and it wasn't very hot. So she figures one of the kids must have come in here and for whatever reason, microwaved the peanut butter and then dumped it on the counter. And so she reflexively turns around. She's like, Jamie, her daughter, Jamie, get in here. Jamie comes inside and she's like, what, Mom? And she's like, did you do this? And Jamie would say that she literally laughed at her mom. Like, why would I do that? And her mom's like, well, I don't know. Do you know if Marie did this? And she's like, no, we've been outside. So she shoos her daughter away and she calls in Marie. And Marie too is like, no, I didn't touch the peanut butter. Susan ultimately just kind of says, okay, the kids don't want to own up to it. It's a great day today. I'm not gonna let this ruin it. And so she's kind of rationalizing what's going on. She's thinking, okay, one of the kids must have knocked it over without meaning to, and maybe it was warmer in here and I just didn't realize it and it melted. Any number of things could have been the reason for this, but I just don't care. After cleaning up the peanut butter, Susan leaves the house and they, all four of them, spend the rest of the day goofing around outside near the pool. When they come back in the house later that day, they find that there have been cans that you would keep in your pantry, like canned food, stacked on each of the steps leading upstairs. They also find that there have been random objects placed all over the house in strange patterns. In the bathroom, they find shampoo bottles stacked on top of one another, hairbrushes arranged in a star pattern on the counter. They open the microwave and find peanut butter jars and other random canned foods and stuffed animals from the kids' rooms in the microwave. The cleaning materials underneath the sink had been pulled out and arranged in a height line from shortest to tallest on the kitchen floor. Also, there were just strange liquids all over the walls. It looked like maybe ketchup or other sauces. They couldn't really tell what it was, but it was sprayed all over the house. There was shampoo on the walls and soap on the walls. And so when Susan and Matt and the girls go inside, they think that someone's invaded their house. So they run back out again. They're kind of looking around the property, wondering what they should do. And no one's come near their property, and they would have seen someone come to their property. So they start filming it. They go in and they film what's going on. That's why we have all these pictures. And they have no idea what to make of this. Matt believes it's Jamie, so not his biological daughter. Susan believes it's his daughter, Marie, and it starts this awful conflict between Matt and Susan. This would be the start of what would turn out to be a major fracture in this family, because it just continued to grow. You got to put yourself in their position. If you're Matt or Susan, you don't want this to be anything other than one of the kids did this. If it's not one of the kids, it means you had an intruder in your home. If it's not an intruder, then what caused it? They believe that the other child is doing this. They believed it so much that they did not see reason, but more than that, it would keep Matt and Susan from handling this the way I think anyone should have, which is get the police involved. They don't. So they start cleaning it up, and the house was really a mess. So it took quite a while to clean it up. And they ultimately just kind of moved on in that way that people who are in denial move on because you're in denial. That's what they were doing. So a week passes since finding their house in disarray with cans and jars all over the place and liquids on the walls. And Jamie and Marie are spending some time together in Jamie's room. Marie was sitting at a desk that was next to the bed, and Jamie had a cup of coffee. She puts the cup of coffee down on the desk next to Marie and says, I have to go use the bathroom. She turns around, she walks out, she comes back, and Marie has her head down in her homework. She's not apparently paying attention to anything around her. And Jamie walks in and sees that the cup of coffee that had been sitting on the desk has now been thrown all over her bed. And there's only been one person inside of the room, and that's been Marie. She's like, Marie, what are you doing? Why'd you throw my coffee all over the bed? And Marie pokes her head up and she's like, what are you talking about? And she looks over at the coffee and she's just as surprised as Jamie is. She's like, I didn't do that. Jamie doesn't believe Marie. She's mad at her because Jamie believed that Marie was the one responsible for placing the cans and everything all over the house. And so this was just another example of her trying to get attention or something like that. Jamie leaves the room to get some bleach. She comes back and she puts the bleach down on her dresser. She had all her drawers open with her clothes out. And she has this bottle of bleach sitting right at the top of this dresser. And so she goes over to the bed, picks up the cup itself that had the coffee. She puts that back on the table, turns around to get the bleach, and the cap has been turned off and it's now dumping bleach all over her clothes. It's just pouring out. Marie had been sitting in the chair the whole time, and Jamie had seen her the whole time. And so when she sees the bleach dumping all over her clothes, she knows it could not have been Marie. So she screams. Marie looks over. She sees what's going on. She screams. Susan hears this and comes charging in the room, and she's like, what's going on? The girls can't describe what's going on. And as they're standing there, a picture frame falls off the wall. And it startles them all. They're looking over, and then another picture falls. It's one thing to have one picture fall, but to have two fall in close succession to one another, that's not a coincidence. Susan sees the pictures fall, she hears her kids in hysterics, and they run out of there. They get in the car and actually just leave the house because the girls just did not want to be there. This was a big moment in this story because to this point, Jamie, without saying anything, believed Marie was responsible for placing everything around the house and making a mess in the house. Marie felt the same way about Jamie. Again, they didn't say it to each other, but it's how they rationalized it. Susan was doing the same thing, but for both of the kids. She basically believed that either Marie or Jamie had placed the cans all over the house. Now, Susan is starting to believe that something else is going on in the house, and Marie and Jamie absolutely believe something is going on in the house. They actually suggested that we believe our house is haunted. At some point after driving around, Susan and Jamie and Marie go back to the house. Matt has been at work the whole time, so he's not there. When they get back to the house is once again covered in cans all up the stairs, placed in weird orientations on the ground, things in the microwave. The fridge has been opened, all the food's been dumped out, there's liquids all over the wall, and they hadn't been there. And neither had Matt. Now combine it with the fact that you just had this coffee and bleach incident and the picture's fallen off the wall. They're talking about the house being haunted. You can imagine what it was like to walk into that house and see it like that all over again when it could not have been Jamie or Marie or Susan. When Matt came home that night, he was just more convinced that it had to have been Marie or Jamie or even Susan, because Susan's acting like something's going on here, something paranormal's going on here, and he wasn't there. He didn't see the coffee and bleach incident. He didn't see the pictures falling off the wall. And now he sees his girlfriend kind of buying into this idea that it's some paranormal thing. He was a really intense skeptic and was just absolutely unwilling to see this as anything other than a bad prank that now his girlfriend is even getting in on. It causes a huge fight between him and Susan. He's like, why are you letting the kids doing this? Why are you feeding into this? She's saying, you don't get it. There's something wrong with this house. Practically at each other's throats, they pick the house up again. It takes forever. They put everything back, and by the end of it, it's like no one wants to talk to each other. The kids are fighting with each other. Susan and Matt practically hate each other, and that's how that night wraps up. That night, all the power went out in the house, and all they heard all night was doors banging nonstop. And their stove is set to light, so all you hear is that clicking sound. They couldn't get it to turn off. I mean, right in front of them. There's all this paranormal activity and they're recording it. And they have no idea what to do. Even though we view this story and say, come on guys, either this is an elaborate hoax or you gotta go to the police. You gotta do something right here. You're doing it wrong. You're in denial, you're fighting with each other. You can't do that. You gotta do something about this. But now put yourself in their position. Their world has been completely turned upside down. Everything they believed and understood about the world is being questioned right now. They are trying to hold on to every last shred of that former life and understanding of life that they had before this haunting began. And so they don't handle this well. They just continue to fight and to be at each other's throats, blaming each other for all the things that are blatantly happening in front of them that have nothing to do with Matt, Susan, Jamie, or Marie. So at this point, Susan and Matt and the girls have not told any of their friends or other family members about what's going on. So the next day, Susan would actually go to her close friend and say, here's what's going on, and I have no idea what to do. And her friend would say, maybe you ought to try giving it a peace offering. Maybe this thing in your house, feels like you're intruding. And if you offer some sort of peace offering to demonstrate that you mean no harm, that you want to coexist, that maybe it'll get along with you. Maybe it'll stop. So whether this was good advice or not, we don't know. But Susan finally has something that she has control over. And she really gets into this. She gets the girls. She knows Matt's going to be out for the day at work. And she knows Matt would not be cool with doing this. He would not believe that offering a peace offering is going to do any good. It would just cause more fights. And so she saw this window of time to take the girls and do this peace offering. She had this little figurine. It was a cat figurine. Susan loved cats, and she figured that a cat represented something she loved. And so it would be the perfect kind of deliberate, intentional offering showing that she means no harm, they mean no harm. Let's kind of call a truce here. And she puts candles on this table, and she puts the cat right in the middle, and she doesn't know what to say or how to do it. And the girls are just sitting there like, what's happening here? And Susan just kind of says, please accept this gift. It's my gift to you. We mean no harm and we want to coexist. It just so happens that as they're performing this kind of ritual, Matt came home. He had not slept the night before. It had been a really bad night with the slamming of doors and all that craziness. And so he left work early. He called in sick, basically. And he comes into the house and literally sees Susan doing this kind of ritual with his daughter and his stepdaughter. And he immediately goes to like, absolutely not. We're not going to go to trying to interact with this thing. We're not going to act like it's real. It's not real. And so he goes over and he kind of picks up on what they're doing, that this cat figurine is at the center of attention. And, Susan and the girls are telling him, don't do anything, don't touch it. And he takes the figurine and he walks out to the back deck and throws it onto their backyard. And Susan and the girls are crying because they're like, oh my gosh, you're going to make this so much worse. Everybody's attention is towards the backyard. When they all turn around to look at the mantle, Matt thinking he had solved the problem, there is a figurine, an identical one of the cat that's sitting on the table. They all gasp, they can't believe it. And it doesn't make any sense. They watched Matt throw the figurine. Matt doesn't care. Picks it up and throws it on the ground and smashes it right then and there. And it's just this crazy sequence of events that when you hear the first-hand interviews with Susan, she can barely describe this moment because you're seeing something reappear. And then Matt is destroying it. It's like a very deliberate, aggressive act towards this thing in the house. The very opposite of what it was meant to do. And Susan would say that she knew they were going to go through hell for that. That night, after everybody finally fell asleep, Jamie wakes up in the middle of the night and goes down into the kitchen to get a snack. When she goes in there, she sees written all over the walls, everywhere, is the word cat. Everywhere. And she immediately runs upstairs. She gets her mom, she gets Matt and Marie. Everybody sees that there's this word cat written everywhere. Matt looks at Jamie and says, you're the one that found this. You did this. Susan comes to defend Jamie and says, you're the one, Matt, that smashed the cat figurine. There's no wonder this is happening. And so this horrible fight happens where they aren't seeing what's actually going on. They're just seeing red and fighting with each other. Meanwhile, they're blatantly being haunted. In addition to cat being written everywhere, the house had been completely ransacked. I mean, everything's been dumped out of drawers. Everywhere that you could make a mess, there had been a mess made. And no one woke up to it. They were all in bed. No one woke up to this much of a mess. It didn't make any sense. They start cleaning up this horrible mess. And as they move some things aside in the kitchen, they find what looks to be a huge footprint. It is not Matt's footprint. It's certainly not one of the girls' footprints. It's easy for us to say, well, why didn't you go to the police? But you got to remember that when you're in real crisis mode, your brain will tell you that everything is fine. It will be in complete denial of things that are right in front of you because it's a coping mechanism. And so they did nothing and just let it continue. Susan desperately wanted to leave the house, but she couldn't do it financially. They couldn't leave the house. They couldn't afford to. So they're trapped. At this point, the kids are getting very withdrawn. They don't want to be in the house, so Marie would end up staying in her room all day. Jamie would do the same thing. Matt and Susan weren't talking. There was just nothing being done to correct the situation, and everybody was so upset and angry with each other. It was just a worst case scenario. So in the last couple of weeks that they ever stayed at this house, because they would leave, two major events occurred. The first one happened when Marie was home alone. She was only going to be there for a couple hours by herself, and even though Susan and Matt did not want to leave her alone, they didn't have another choice, and Jamie wasn't there, so Marie's going to be home alone, and it's nighttime. So this is like straight out of a horror movie. She's sitting in the living room watching TV, and at some point the TV starts turning off and on. So off on, off on, off on, and she knows, because she's been in this house now and seen the craziness, that something bad's about to happen. And the TV finally just turns off. She can't get it on. She reaches for the remote flies off the table. And now she's just sitting there frozen because she knows that something's in the house with her. She watches as the rocking chair right in front of her just starts to rock back and forth, as if the person or thing that had pulled away the remote had walked over and sat down in the rocking chair and was now looking at her rocking back and forth. Marie is looking at the rocking chair as all the pictures on the walls just start one by one falling off the wall. Marie and Jamie had a habit of always having a digital camera with them at all times because they were taking pictures and filming everything strange happening in their house. And so as she's laying there, just absolutely horrified, She takes her camera in her hand and kind of turns it and just starts taking pictures of the room before running out of the room to get her phone, where she calls Susan, she calls her dad, she calls everybody. She's screaming into the phone, "You got to get here, something's going on." And Susan flies home, Jamie flies home, they rush inside and they grab her, and she's unhurt, but the house has once again been tossed. And then, after it all kind of settles down, Marie says, "I took pictures." And so Susan and Matt and Jamie look at these pictures. There are these weird orbs of light that are very clearly in the room with her, that are moving around the room. She managed to get a couple pictures of them, and they're just totally out of this world. At this point, Matt is convinced that there's something paranormal happening in the house. He's not even putting up the charade that this is Jamie, because it wasn't. It wasn't his daughter, it wasn't anybody. How can you explain these pictures? You can't. And so Matt decides, well, I don't know who we call for this, but I think you call the church. And so he tried calling a bunch of priests and pastors and tried to get anybody to come over. And the best he could do was get a pastor to come over and pray with them before leaving and saying, "We can't help you." And so they were totally on their own, and they can't afford to leave. They know something horrible is happening here, and they're just trapped. And finally, the second major event that occurred in those final 2 weeks happened to Jamie when she was home alone. Jamie was in her room and she starts hearing pounding on the door. She started filming this pounding on the door. There's no one home. And you just hear in her voice that she's terrified and someone is pounding over and over on the door, on her bedroom door. And at some point she knows she has to go into the hall. And so she goes over to the door, and she's building the strength to reach down and open the door. And as soon as her hand would go near the doorknob, the pounding on the other side of the door would stop. Like it knew she was about to come out into the hall. And so she didn't open the door, and she went back onto her bed, and she just sat there in the fetal position for 3 hours, listening to something smashing nonstop into the door. At some point, the banging stops. And after a few minutes of the banging being done, she thinks this is her chance to escape the house. She opens the door, and there's no one there. But the door on the outside, where the knocking had been happening, there's this huge dent and divot in the door. And the door handle on the outside, from the hallway side, has been bent downward. On the ground in the hall is a pile of utensils, pots, pans, silverware, knives. This thing had been using tools to try to open the door. Next door to her room was a bathroom, and the bathroom door did not have a doorknob on it. You basically just pushed it shut. But there was a space for a doorknob that you could actually look through. They just hadn't put it on there yet. And she noticed in the bathroom that the light was flickering, and she thought, I think it's in there. And she decides she's going to try to trap this thing. So she goes to her desk where she had some string. She goes back over and loops the string through this hole in the door and leans back and pulls the door shut, thinking she's trapped this thing inside. As soon as she does, she starts feeling resistance on the door. Someone is pulling back. And at some point, the string gets cut and she falls back into her room. At which point, the bathroom door swings open and she says, I'm about to come face to face with something out of my nightmares. But before she could see this thing come out of the bathroom, her bedroom door slams shut and she hears the rustling of pans and tools and metal clinking against each other right outside her door. She knows this thing is interacting with all those tools and pots and pans right on the other side of her door. It's this horrifying thought. And after just a moment or two, she sees smoke coming into her bedroom. And so she immediately runs to the door to try to open it. And when she does, she sees that now there is a frying pan sitting in the hall that has a toilet paper roll completely on fire. And that there's been toilet paper strewn all over the hallway. Like this is a wick and it's gonna light the hallway on fire. She grabs a sweatshirt and she smothers the fire. At this point, she's in full survival mode. She knows she has to get out of this house. It's trying to kill her. And so she walks down this hall, pulling aside all of the toilet paper, getting ready to come face to face with this horrible thing. She goes into the living room. The whole thing has been covered in toilet paper, paper towels, papers have been strewn everywhere. This thing was trying to light the house on fire with her trapped inside. And so she manages to make her way through this maze of toilet paper. She sees there's no other fire set, and she goes outside defeated and just sits on the front steps of her house, waiting for her mom to come back. Susan, Matt, and Marie were all together, so they came back and they saw Jamie sitting on the front steps just crying. They go inside, they see the scene. Jamie explains what happens, and that was it. They knew they were going to have to go bankrupt to leave the house. They did not have the money to leave, but they had to leave. And so they barely packed up and they left that house. It didn't sell. Susan literally went bankrupt. And soon after they left the neighborhood, their neighbors left the neighborhood, and 5 other neighbors in their immediate vicinity all left. All of the houses did not sell. They are all vacant. No one knows why. Susan, Jamie, Matt, and Marie, since leaving that neighborhood, even though they were ruined financially, they were very happy to get out of there. They've had no other paranormal activity since they left, and they're just glad they got out of there with their lives. So I'd love to get your reaction to this story. What'd you think of it? What do you think happened? Let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to get back to as many of you as I possibly can. If you enjoyed today's story and you want to hear more stories like it, then if you haven't done this already, please sneak into the bathroom the next time the like button is taking a shower and steal their towel and their clothes. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you have a story that you think would be a good fit for this channel, whether it's your personal story or just a story suggestion, please go to our subreddit. It's just called MrBallen. It's linked below in the description, and submit it there. I read that subreddit every single day, so I will definitely see it if you put it on there. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My username is JohnBallen416. I also just started using a Twitter account. My username is also JohnBallen416. And I'm very active on TikTok, where my username is MrBallen. So whether I see you on Reddit, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, some combination, I just really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya. Today, I'm going to share with you 3 progressively more disturbing stories, and at the end of each of them, I'm going to share the picture or pictures that are famously associated with them. But before I get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please fling a rubber band at the like button, and then subscribe to this channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's stories. In 2014, a 20-year-old man living in India named Maksud Khan had become completely and totally obsessed with tigers. His wife and his family weren't entirely sure what caused him to be so fixated on tigers, but they noticed after a kind of random trip to the zoo that he took, that he came home and all he could talk about were tigers. So they figured he must have seen tigers at the zoo and just become totally enamored with them. But Maksud's obsession with tigers was not just, love and affection for these animals, although certainly there was that. It was more of a dark fascination with tigers' savage nature. The story Maksud used to tell all the time to his friends and family was about this tiger that was in captivity, and one day its 2 trainers had gone into the cage to put a garland of flowers around its neck for maybe some ceremony or something, and the tiger just wasn't having it that day, and when they went to put it on its neck, the tiger kind of snapped and killed the 2 trainers. Now, Maksud was not telling the story to kind of glorify the violence of it, or even to act like it wasn't a big deal that these trainers had been killed. He was telling the story with a reverence for these creatures that were kind of untamable, that even in captivity, they were in control, and he was just totally fascinated by them. In May of that year, Maksud lost his job, something that unfortunately happened all the time for him because he was known to be kind of lazy and kind of happy-go-lucky, didn't take things very seriously. He had actually been fired from a job one time when he was supposed to be unloading sacks from a truck and got distracted by some small animal and ran after it, and his employer fired him for it. But his family depended on him, and they said, Maksud, you got to go out and get another job. And so during the day, Maksud would go out and tell his family, I'm going out job hunting. But what he was really doing is spending the little money his family had to go to the zoo to go look at these tigers that he was so in love with. So for the next 4 months, Maksud would just lie to his family and would go to the zoo and stare at the tigers in their exhibit. And so one day when he was doing just that, on September 23rd, 2014, he was looking into the white tiger exhibit. Now, the way it was set up is there was an outer fence that all of the people who were at the zoo could stand right against, and it was an open air exhibit. Right on the other side of that fence, all the way around, was a little bit of land that protruded into the exhibit a little ways, and then it would drop straight down into a moat that was another layer of protection between the tigers and people, so they were not interacting. If you continued straight past the moat, it would go back up again to this little island right in the middle of this exhibit where all the tigers would spend all their time. For some reason that we don't fully understand, although one could guess that it was simply because Maqsood wanted a better look at the tigers, he climbed over that first fence, the one that no visitors are allowed to cross. And he walked to the edge of that piece of land that sits over that moat. And he's looking down at the tigers, and the guards are telling him to go back, get back on the other side of the fence. All of the other people that are there watching the tigers as well, the other visitors, they're saying, hey, come back, don't do what you're doing. And at some point, Maqsood fell 15 feet into the tiger enclosure. Immediately, an alarm goes off, waking up the tigers in their habitat, so they don't know what's going on. They're kind of looking around. And the people that are watching this happen from the safety of behind this fence, they're screaming and yelling, and they're trying to get security to come over, and they're trying to save this guy. It's just chaos. But what's really happening is they're totally inciting the tigers to see what the heck's going on. And very quickly, one of the tigers notices that there is now a person, Maqsood, who's in the moat. And the tiger jumps down into the moat and walks right over to Maqsood. And Maqsood is sitting there and he's absolutely terrified. And people said that he was just praying and he's huddled up against the side of the moat. And the tiger's just looking at him. The tiger's not showing signs that it's going to harm Maqsood. But the people that were watching this happen that are on the other side of this fence are either taking videos and pictures of the event, or some of them begin picking up rocks and throwing them at the tiger to try to, I guess, get the tiger to leave Maqsood alone. 10 minutes goes by of people throwing rocks at this tiger, and the tiger gets really upset. And so what do you think happens once the tiger gets upset? It attacks Maqsood. The tiger clamped down on Maqsood's neck and dragged him over to a grassy kind of hidden section within the enclosure. And by the time the staff finally showed up with a tranquilizer gun, it was too late for Maqsood. He was already dead. Here is the final picture of Maqsood after he's fallen inside of that moat. This is taken moments before this tiger would ultimately attack and kill him. The police would ultimately charge the zoo staff with death by negligence for their incredibly long response time and for not having any alternative rescue methods in place. John and Jackie Nill were a Canadian married couple that loved traveling to Thailand. In fact, they went there so often and loved it so much that they considered it their second home. In 2004, instead of spending Christmas with their family back home in Canada, they decided, you know what, we're empty nesters, we're on our own, let's go spend Christmas in a place that we love that's also warm, Thailand. And so they settled on one of their favorite spots in Thailand called Khao Lak. It's this beautiful beach town. They'd been there many times, and so they were pumped. On Christmas Day, they called their family and said they're having such a great time. The weather is beautiful. They have this wonderful beach right in front of them, and by all accounts, their vacation seemed to be going really perfectly. On December 26th, the day after Christmas, the couple woke up and decided to head down to the beach to spend the day lounging on the sand. But as soon as they stepped out of their villa and looked down at the beach, which was right outside of where they were staying, they saw this huge crowd of people standing on the sand. And even though it was early in the morning, John and Jackie knew immediately why they were down there. It was an extremely low tide. The water had receded so far that it was a spectacle. And so they had their digital camera with them and they just started taking pictures. What John and Jackie and the people down on the beach seem not to have realized is that that extreme low tide is actually an early indication of a tsunami tidal wave, where the water basically gets sucked way out in preparation for a massive wave. What John and Jackie and everybody down on that beach should have been doing that morning is turning around and running inland as far as they possibly can go and as high as they possibly can go. But they don't do that. In fact, it looks like no one has any idea what's about to happen. And so John and Jackie continue to take pictures, and you see this massive wave coming closer and closer with every picture they're taking until it wipes out everybody down on the beach and eventually wipes out John and Jackie. They would be swept away to their death along with 230,000 other people. John and Jackie's camera would be found on the beach a month later. The camera itself was destroyed, but the SIM card was intact. And the person who found it would take that SIM card, plug it into their computer, and here are the final pictures that were on that SIM card. John Jones and his family were avid spelunkers, which is a term given to people who explore underground caves. In November of 2009, 26-year-old John was back home in Utah celebrating Thanksgiving with his family. During his visit, someone in his family suggested they go cave exploring like old times as a way to kind of reconnect. And so John, along with his younger brother Josh, who was 23 at the time, and 9 other friends and family got together and headed off to Nutty Putty Cave, which was a very popular spelunking location in their area that no one in his family had actually explored. On November 24, 2009, around 8 p.m., John and his brother, along with the rest of their friends and family, entered Nutty Putty Cave, and they make their way to the section called the Big Slide. It was not particularly challenging, and John, even though he had not been cave exploring in a really long time, felt like he could do something more difficult. So he and his brother decided to split off from the main group and make their way over to the most challenging section of the cave, known as the birth canal. So John and Josh start making their way over towards that section of the cave. They have a map and they're kind of trying to follow as best as they can. And John, who was leading the pair, stops when he gets to this waist-high hole in the wall that he believes is the entrance to the birth canal. When John was growing up and he used to go cave exploring with his family, he was much smaller. He was a kid. Now he's a grown man. He's 6 foot, over 200 pounds, but he still had the mindset of when he was a kid. And so like a child, he sees this hole and literally goes headfirst into it without any second thoughts. So John begins painstakingly inching his way down this tunnel that's completely tight on his body. His arms are pinned under his body, and with every movement he's making, he's getting tighter and tighter. But he's convinced that this is the birth canal and that it just takes certain people that are brave enough to push past that discomfort, that claustrophobia, that if you just push past this tight section, you'll get to a place where it opens up. So John, believing this is the birth canal, kept going farther and farther into this tunnel until he's completely wedged. He has a little bit of tunnel still in front of him that actually kind of bends down in front of him. And he thinks, man, that's it. I just got to go all the way down there and I can get into that opening. And so he's caught up against a lip of rock that's underneath his ribs. And so in order to get past it, he breathes all of the air out of his lungs and he pushes himself just past the lip. And then he breathes in again, and his chest expands, and his rib cage is literally caught up on that lip because he's now moved past it. He can't bring himself back over the lip. And what's worse is as soon as he got over that little lip, he got a better view into this hole he was going down, and it dead ends. It just gets to a point. There was nothing there. It was not the birth canal. It was an unmarked tunnel somewhere in this cave. So he's trapped, and he knows it. And to make matters even worse, John was almost completely upside down. John yells to his brother and says he's stuck. Josh starts going down this tunnel and he almost immediately gets stuck, and from where he is, he can barely see his brother, who's way down this tiny little tunnel. And he knows that if he's stuck up here, his brother's really stuck. This is a very, very bad situation they're in. So Josh barely gets himself out of this tunnel and he yells to John that he's gonna go get help. But it would take 3.5 hours for the first rescue worker to arrive on scene because they are way down into this cave. This is not an easy to access area. Susie Matola was the first rescue person, and when she arrived, she said, "Hey John, how you doing down there?" And Susie would say that John sounded very distant, and he just said, "Hi Susie, thanks for coming, but I really, really want to get out." Susie immediately reassured John that she will have him out in no time, everything's going to be just fine. But when Susie looked down into this tiny little space that John was stuck in, she thought this is going to take a really long time to get him out. I mean, just to set up a pulley system to try to pull him out is going to take a long time. And then inching a 6 foot, 200-pound man out of this tiny space, that's going to take hours and maybe even days. But unfortunately, John didn't have the time. The human body is designed to be upright, with gravity helping your heart pump blood to the rest of your body. When you're inverted, blood pools in your brain and your heart cannot work fast or hard enough to get it out in time, and so it eventually causes your body to shut down. So when the trauma physician saw that John was inverted and he had already been there for 3.5 hours before rescuers even got to him, he told Susie and the rest of the rescuers that John maybe has 8 to 10 hours left to live. The rescuers tried everything to try to get John out of the cave. They put a rope around his legs and tried yanking him out. Didn't work. They set up an elaborate pulley system. It barely worked, but they kept falling out of the wall, and so it was taking all this time just to get set up, only to move him a fraction of an inch. They got drills and chisels, and they went down into the tunnel and began trying to chisel John out. but again, it was almost negligible progress, and it was just taking too much time. As the rescuers are doing everything they can to try to get him out, they noticed that John's breathing was becoming labored and his voice sounded nasally, indicating that more and more fluid was building up now inside of his lungs, and that probably they were within the last few hours that he was going to be alive. At some point, they finally got John to move just a couple of inches using this really elaborate pulley system that they had found a way to stay anchored in the walls, but they saw there was a huge problem. No matter what system they were going to use to get John out of this hole, due to the angle of the cave he had crawled into, his legs would not fit. They would not bend in the right direction on the way out. They would have to break his legs in order to curve him around this bend in the cave. With John's breathing already labored and him being basically unresponsive at this point, they figured that if they broke his legs, that would just send him into shock and kill him anyways. And so they realized that they cannot get John out of this cave. He's going to die here. 27 hours after John had become stuck, he became unresponsive and he was declared dead. The 26-year-old medical student would leave behind his wife as well as their 1-year-old daughter, and his wife was due with their second child in June of the following year. Following John's death, Nutty Putty Cave was sealed off with cement, and John's body is still inside Nutty Putty Cave to this day. And here is a picture of John exploring Nutty Putty Cave before he ultimately made his way over to that fateful tunnel that he went in headfirst and ultimately died inside of. So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know what you thought of these 3 stories, and I will pin the best comment at the top of the comment section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please fling a rubber band at the like button and also subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username on both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit. It's just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. I read that every day, and if I intentionally use your story, I will absolutely credit you. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.
Alright, let me see him. Come on, buddy. You have the hiccups.
You got him?
Yeah.